good morning. I'm Charles Overby, chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics. It's my privilege to be able to welcome you here for this program, one of several that we're having this fall. This program is particularly dear to my heart. When we started the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics, part of our vision was that we would have a close examination of the relationship between the press and politics and how the two go together or sometimes don't go together, and how they sometimes wittingly, sometimes unwittingly shape public policy together. And today's program is going to help us explore politics in Mississippi and the upcoming elections. I'm particularly pleased to be able to introduce my friend Bill Rose, who's going to moderate the program. He and Curtis Wilkie, who's standing up there like the wise sage that he is, alongside Charlie Mitchell, Bill's a fellow at the Overby Center. Bill and I worked on the Daily Mississippian together, which just shows be careful about the friends you pick in college because they're going to stick with you the rest of your life. So with that, I'm pleased to turn the program over to my friend, Bill Rose.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. You know, we're gathered here 1 year after the wildest, possibly the wildest U.S. Senate race since the days of Theodore Bilbo, to look at Mississippi's upcoming long, hot political summer. And we've got a good panel to take a look at that for us in what we hope will be an illuminating discussion. I want to introduce them. I'll start with the man in the middle. Geoff Pender is the political editor for the Clarion-Ledger, who extensively covered last year's tumultuous Senate race. He's also a former political editor for the Sun-Herald in Biloxi, where he shared in the staff Pulitzer for public service for the coverage of Katrina, which was really distinguished coverage. To his left, no pun intended, is Hayes Dent, a Republican lobbyist, political consultant. Has worked on a number of Mississippi political campaigns, was Governor Kirk Fordyce's Director of Legislative Affairs, served in a bunch of other positions in the Fordyce administration. Hayes, too, was very involved in last year's Senate race on the side of Thad Cochran. And to my left is Grant Sowell, president of the Tea Party in Lee County, also an active Republican. He was very active in last year's Senate campaign on the side of Chris McDaniel. Grant is an account manager for Heritage Stone, and if I'm not mistaken, moderated a couple of political debates in the 1st District in the past. So we'll get started, but before I do, I want to mention one other Overby program that you need to know about, specifically because this program and that kind of go together. On April the 30th in the early evening, we'll get you an exact time later, we have a commitment from a majority of the 13 Republican and Democratic congressional candidates in the 1st District of Mississippi, the race to succeed the late Congressman Nunnally. And that promises to be an interesting event. So we'll get into our program. And we probably should start with that 1st District race. Since talk about wild races, or races that are unpredictable, at least seem to be unpredictable, it has 13 candidates. And guys, you know, 13 candidates. How do you figure, does anybody have, is there a favorite? Is anybody emerged? Is anybody gaining any traction and moving to the head of the pack? Or
I have one prediction. There will be a runoff.
That was easy.
I think that's a safe bet. In a race with 13, there's really no way you're going to get an outright majority in the first primary, I would imagine. Who's likely to get that big block of votes up in DeSoto County? Anybody have an idea? Grant?
You know, that's the million-dollar question, because in Lee County, where I'm from, it's split up a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be essential for them to get in the runoff.
Do y'all think it's going to be that way throughout the district? The vote's going to be split up, and it's going to be whoever can get the largest little block in each county?
It looks that way. I would suspect too, the way things are split in Lee County, Tupelo, all split up, I guess there is no one who can truly claim DeSoto.
Lots have tried.
Right. Lots are trying.
I think there's
but,
5 or 6 candidates claiming it's their home county.
And I wonder too if that big split is gonna perhaps drive turnout down. Is that a likelihood?
I think turnout will
Maybe
go up.
opposite.
I mean, I think there'll be a big turnout. I think that the stunning issue on this race is the fact that you've got a county. Clearly, it's sort of like the old 4th district when we had 5 districts. Everybody was always saying we had to have a candidate from what was referred to as down district, which was code for outside of Jackson. And the notion that you don't have a candidate in this race from DeSoto County is really incredible. I mean, you got 13 candidates, and you've got an area that represents 35% of the vote, and there's nobody there that claims that base, truly claims that base. Is going to be really interesting to watch how that folds.
Another factor in that is the conservative base that it is, that delivered very strong for Chris McDaniel. So I would say the guy with a genuine conservative message should do well there.
Mm-hmm. Like Grant said, DeSoto is a little different probably from the rest of the district as well, as far as probably more keyed in on national issues, perhaps, than state issues.
That's clearly what we saw in 14.
Right.
I mean, there was clearly people were making decisions based off of sort of what I would refer to as national themes. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no question. Henry Ross, who ran against Alan Nunley, is up there basically because Henry ran as a Tea Party. He ran to the right of Allen when he ran for Congress. And so I think he's up there he's one of the 4 or 5 that are up there claiming that is his base. And that's clearly the direction that they're going. I'm not sure that vote, though, will be, sort of universally, they'll pick whoever the most conservative person is in their minds. I think this is a special election. Special elections are always kind of wild cards. And so you really don't know, what's going to happen. There's not a ton of interest. You've got a runoff, surely, that will occur when a lot of people are getting out of school. You got a lot of kids going to camp. You got a lot of, folks going on vacation. And so that will play into this runoff as well.
Issues. Congressional races are often strange races. You can't pinpoint an issue. It's who can get a message out there better than anybody else, who can ride whatever trend is out there. I suspect this is no different, but let me just ask y'all, are there trigger issues that anybody can, any one candidate or 2 candidates can take advantage of, or is it just going to be people are just going to vote for who they like?
I asked a few people prior to coming here today that same question. And one thing I heard that surprised me was Common Core, which is technically not a federal issue, but it's such a hot button issue right now in the state that maybe they're going to piggyback. I think we've already seen some advertising in District 1 on that issue.
I would make a point too. Texas has a Ted Cruz. Utah has a Mike Lee. Mississippi, with our Senate races and our congressional races, all of our congressmen and senators across the state, if you look at like Heritage Foundation, Heritage Action, which is a think tank, as you know, in D.C., that grades conservatism among our congressmen and senators throughout the United States. Here's the ranking. Lifetime ranking of Senator Cochran's 56, Wicker's 55, Nunley was 66, Harper was 48, Palazzo was 62. Where's our Ted Cruz? And I think a lot of the people that consider themselves as true conservatives are trying to cut through the talking points and find out who's the real conservative, who's really going to deal with this $18 trillion in debt we have.
Mm-hmm. So, Mississippi is obviously a conservative state. You think these people we have serving in Congress and in the Senate aren't conservative enough, is what you're telling me?
Absolutely, the record reflects that. Not only with heritage action, you look up congressional scorecards. There's Freedom Works, there's Madison Project, there are many others. They all say the same thing, that they rank very low. In fact, if our kids came home with these grades, they might be grounded for a while. None of them rank past the 70, past the 66, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's a program or a discussion probably for, I mean, I clearly am happy to have it. but I'm not sure that that's exactly, you know, we talk about a national conservative or a Ted Cruz or whatever. Texas is a little bit different state than Mississippi. You've got a state that will double in size over the next 20 years. You've got more jobs created in 2014 in Texas than almost virtually all the other states combined, okay? So you've got a different electorate. And so I have always believed as a conservative that Thad Cochran is a conservative. I think that that was a huge issue, and it was probably unsettled, truthfully, last year. But I think that the majority of the people in the state believe that. And so I think that, again, that's a discussion that one I love having, quite frankly, but it's one that probably can't be settled here today. I think that another issue that's interesting in this first district race is the residency issue. Mike Taggart does not live in the district. You can't, you can run for Congress. I could go run for Congress in Texas or California if I wanted to. Walter Zinn is a gentleman who is from Pontotoc. He grew up in Pontotoc. He's moved home and has sort of tried to say, I'm the lone Democrat in the race. Walter's really not, he's moved here. There's another candidate, Quentin Whitwell, who grew up kind of in Oxford but has moved here only recently. And so the residency issue, I think in a runoff, now I think that there's several candidates that are already attacking what Mike Taggart's response is. I already represent every person in the congressional district, okay? And I'm not gonna let 4 miles or whatever it is from a gerrymandered line, essentially, stop me from doing the work that I think that I can do for the people that live in this district. And, I haven't heard whether he's gonna move into the district or not afterwards, but I think in the runoff, that will be the issue, because I think Taggart will probably make the runoff because of his name ID.
I would piggyback off that and say that he has a good chance of making the runoff because of his name ID and because Haley Barbour is behind him. That's his choice pick. And we know that's, in my opinion, a corrupt machine, but it is a machine nonetheless. And that being said, I'd also like to piggyback off the fact Texas is a prosperous country. I do work in Texas. I just set up accounts all over Houston. #1 in remodeling, #1 in new construction, #1 in job growth. Why is that, though? It's because there's a business friendliness in Texas because of the conservative policies. Mississippi can be that too, but we have to have the right leadership to get there. And it does take a true conservative that believes in limited government, less taxes, more free markets, more freedom.
Okay. Well, along those lines, and you mentioned Mississippi has been on some measurements the most conservative state, but we're also the poorest. I think our politicians throughout the years have had to have a little pragmatism along with their conservative values when it comes to federal funds here and everything. I think that's been a clash that's really come to the forefront here recently.
Well, to speak to that, popular opinion is among some would be that government has the solutions to our problems. They have some solutions, but often they make things worse than they do better. And as a result, if money was going to raise us out of the bottom, 41 years of the incumbent Senator Thad Cochran should help us get off the bottom in education and health and poverty, but it hasn't done it, and he has brought home the bacon as well as many of our congressmen have. I believe, like Benjamin Franklin, when it comes to poverty, I'm for helping the poor, but to drive them out of it And in countries where government has assisted the poor, they stayed in their poverty. Where they stepped back and let them dig themselves out of it, those people prospered.
Okay. Well, let me take y'all to a different issue, and that is these dueling constitutional amendments around the MAP program. Whether or not the legislature will live up to its commitment to fully fund, according to the formula the legislature set, public education in Mississippi, commonly known as MAP. The so-called Parents Campaign has put together a proposal that says we're going to put that in the state constitution, that they have to do what they said they were going to do. And not only that, we're going to see that it's enforced or can be enforced by a Hinds County Chancery judge, if I'm not mistaken. And then the legislature came back and they presented another alternative on the same ballot. The parents claim that that's to sow confusion. The legislature says, no, we're just protecting ourselves and doing the right thing. But that proposal says that the legislature will provide for an effective public school system. And that it doesn't mention anything about going over the legislature's head to anybody to enforce that. Leaves it in the hands of the legislature. So those are the two dueling amendments. The fact that there are two amendments, number one, does that create enough confusion so that neither one will be able to muster a majority and pass? Geoff?
Potentially, yes. The way that's set up, and it's hard to understand and even hard to explain. Essentially, to have your vote counted, you're going to have to vote twice on the same issue on a ballot, as I understand. So there's going to be confusion. Just the fact that you have the two split dueling things at the end of a ballot, that is certainly going to affect the vote. Some supporters of the Better Schools Group's initiative, I think the way they phrased it is that 75% of people could support that, and it still failed depending on how it shook out on the ballot. So that's going to be interesting. This is
and clearly the legislature did this to muddy the waters. Okay, the initiative and referendum process is a process that members of the legislature do not favor. They do not want it. They'll tell you that they don't want it, but they like making decisions. Okay, that's what they think their jobs are, and so this alternative that was run through in literally 24 hours, about 48 tops, wouldn't you? I'd say 48 hours. I mean, it was very, very quick process. This past year was the 24th year I've worked in the Mississippi Capitol. And for 24 years, there have been two forces in the building. Not necessarily always Republican, not necessarily always Democrat. It was, we got to do this with education. We got to spend more money on education because that will be what works. That will be, and the other guys are saying, no, money's not the solution to the problem. Look at Pontotoc City Schools. They spend less than anybody, and they've got some of the best public schools in the state. Look at Jackson Public Schools. They spend more than anybody. They've got the worst public schools in the state. So a year ago, at a Stennis luncheon, Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves made a comment. Geoff, you were there. I know you remember. He said, I think we ought to fully fund MAEP and take it off the table. I'm tired of hearing everybody talk about it. I'm tired of hearing everybody argue about it. Let's fund it fully. And I remember thinking, I was driving back to Yazoo City thinking, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But I started thinking about it, and over the next month or so, I decided, why not? The Republican-led legislature and executive branch in Mississippi has not done as good a job as they should have at reducing the size of government in Mississippi. And so there's $200 million out there that they could find and fully fund it, take it off the table, and then use it as nowadays in the world of 2014 and others, compromise is a bad word. Compromise, I've watched people compromise and things got along much better than when everybody ran to opposite corners and said, well, this guy's liberal and this guy over here saying this guy's conservative and everybody's like this and nothing's getting done. And so I think that fully funding this thing what it would do is it would take off from the argument. Then it would be able to let Tate Reeves and Philip Gunn and others say, okay, now let's talk about real accountability. And so that's what I would, that's what I would like to see. But the alternative clearly was put in to muddy the water. Jeff's right, and it's probably neither amendment will pass.
I agree with Hayes' position that our legislators haven't done a great job. However, to put it into the hands of a single judge to make that call is not necessarily a good situation either. So I'm not a big fan of MAEP. I'm not a fan of either initiative. One, to put it in the hands of a judge and take it out of the hands of our legislators, who are indeed our representative voice. So that's the problem, our representative voice with them. And I guess the question is, if they're not doing a good job, bring them home, get someone that will represent our voice. As far as $200 million digging that up, I can't dig it up in my backyard or my front yard, so I don't know where all this money comes from. But I will say that if Thad Cochran is a conservative, Harry Reid said he hopes that he won that election and comes back to do some more appropriations. So if Harry Reid likes him, I give pause to that. So he's no conservative in my book.
Well, so that brings up my next question, which is, will the debate over MAP, is it going to be of enough intensity to affect other races on the ballot? Will it be an issue that bleeds over into other politicking, or will it be an animal to itself?
A year ago, I guess I would have thought certainly it's going to be a huge issue. As it goes on, I don't know. Given the alternative put on the ballot now, that's certainly going to affect things. One thing the GOP leadership in the legislature managed to do this year is change the subject during much of the session. And I think I accused them or pointed out before that maybe that's what some of the tax cut talk was, to diffuse that politically a little bit, get the conversation away from that. So whether it's going to be the driving issue in legislative races, that's going to depend. There are parts of the state, some up here where it probably will be a huge issue. I think there's parts of the state where it's not going to resonate. But like I said, the legislature did manage to tamp that down as a political issue the last few months.
So take that a step further. If MAP is not a major issue in a lot of races, I'm thinking about these legislative races that are going to take place this year. If I'm not mistaken, every seat in the legislature, every Mississippi House of Representatives seat, every Mississippi Senate seat is up for grabs. And the issue that usually comes up about this time and has come up again is, can the Democrats, which controlled both houses forever until Republicans took over, can they regain one of those houses in this summer's election? Jeff, what do you think?
Mathematically, certainly. I think in the House we've got, is it 31 contested, or is that total House and Senate?
Truly contested. No, I think in the House.
Sure, mathematically, I think you're looking at probably a dozen seats that will, 10 to a dozen that will truly be.
Yeah, that will be very competitive.
Very competitive.
And clearly that's mostly in the House.
Sure, sure.
In the Senate, they did a better job, quite frankly, just on a purely political basis. They did a better job of gerrymandering the districts to favor their body. And so I think that you'll probably actually see the Republicans pick up 2 or 3 seats, maybe 4. The challenge for the Democrats is that the House members came to the party late, but they ended up getting there eventually. And so I think if they're 5 or 6, I mean, you've got 5 Republicans right now who would switch back to the Democratic Party, that's for political expediency alone. And so that is a finer line, the House. And so that one will be fun to watch. My prediction is that the Republicans will retain both houses, that it'll probably end up being a wash. There may be a pickup of 2 seats on either side, but it'll probably end up being a wash.
Yeah.
In the chambers,
Right,
in
you
the
agree?
House and Senate.
Yes, I agree. I think the bigger question is limited government, both from the Democrats and the Republicans, and why MAEP may not be as big a deal. The position one takes on Common Core has been a very big deal, and that is a deciding factor, I think, in some of these races. More Republicans pitting against Republicans, who, our particular senator who's running for Congress, Senator Collins, was for Common Core before she was against it, just like Tate Reeves. Now it's election year and they're against it, but they were pushing it all along.
So last year's Senate race, a lot of money was spent. This year, legislative races. Just think about only legislative races. Will we see the kind of outpouring of donors and interest groups and PACs and people that don't have to really identify themselves much, pouring big money into legislative races as they have pumped into some of the statewide races?
Sure. Just in the last few cycles, I mean, we've seen, you and I had this discussion earlier, actually, house races, state house races that used to be you buy a few yard signs and shake a few hands, have become fairly big money races, campaign, third-party advertising, a lot of money pumped in. That's been a sea change, to me anyway, in the
Oh yeah,
15
for sure.
or so years I've been
We're-
covering them.
We're handling 4 legislative races where the budgets will go well over $200,000.
Wow.
So you've got, and those are metro areas. It's Madison County, one in Hattiesburg, one on the Gulf Coast, two in the Jackson metro area. So, but very large dollar. People with
And
large.
that's just campaigns, right? Not
That's-
counting third-party money.
Yeah, and the state, the Democrats will have a PAC, the Republicans will have a PAC. Most people, one of the things we talk about 2014, McDaniel got his money from out of state, and so they're not interested. Out of state groups aren't as particularly interested in who the state insurance commissioner is or who represents District 42 in the House or whatever. And so you're not going to see the kind of out-of-state influence in this cycle.
About on the cosmic scale of.
You'll see it again. They tend to get involved in the Supreme Court races, which there'll be a lot of those next year. But in this cycle, you won't see that kind of outside money. It's more, everybody's kind of got their own basis. Got a couple of candidates running on a statewide basis that will, in some cases, self-fund, which is a new term. People kind of writing their own check, not to say that anybody would ever want to buy an office, but some of that goes on, I think.
I'd like to respond to his statement, getting a little off topic, but that McDaniel had most of his money from out of state. He did enjoy a lot of money from out of state, as did Thad Cochran. But if you look at small donations, mom and pop donations, there were more donations, from my understanding, in most regions throughout Mississippi to McDaniel, but they were small donors. You had larger donors.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
So, which is reflective of people.
So, is this a good thing for politics? This Supreme Court decision a while back that said, "Okay, boys, wide open, spend as much money as you want. Anybody can do that. It's a constitutional principle. We're embracing it, and if you got it, you can spend it. It's freedom of expression."
It's certainly,
What does that do to politics?
It certainly moved it a level away from the grassroots level, particularly the all sorts of untraceable soft money or barely traceable. That's brought a huge
I think
change in that federal elections.
Yeah, I think it's driven this sort of political class, and people would argue that I'm a member of that group, but it's there. Everything is so shrill right now, and there's no true debate anymore. It's I launch my social media offensive, you launch yours, I buy TV, you buy TV. And so, you know, people aren't, and not coincidentally, the turnout is becoming a little bit smaller. Fewer people are voting. I tell people all the time, I tell candidates all the time, right now, so the primaries, Democrat and Republican, will take place around the 1st of August. And right now is when you spend big money. Candidates tend to want to say, well, I'm going to raise my money and I'm going to, you know, buy television backward from August the 4th, for example. And so that way I'm going to think about the week before the primary and you cut your television on and it's all you see. And so it all becomes like Charlie Brown noise. You know, you just don't see anything really. And so now candidates can get a 20-to-1 return on their money as opposed to in June and July it'll be a 2-to-1 return on their money. And so, but the money is clearly a problem. I just have not figured out yet how to limit it. You know, George Will said term limits were a bad idea whose time has come. You know, a lot of these things we find problems and then we go try to fix problems. And but clearly this untraceable, you know, dark of night money is someone's got to do something about it.
I agree. I found a lot of that untraceable money that actually is open to public record in some of these radio stations.
You can find a lot of it.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Some of this money was funded. It was exploiting minorities in this last McDaniel-Cochran race. Thousands and thousands of dollars. It was traced back to D.C., but it was spent in Meridian and the Delta and a lot of different places. Yep.
So I don't want to miss out on state elections. You know, it's easy to think, because things are so dominated by the incumbents, that all these incumbents in state races will have a cakewalk this summer. Long political summer, heck, they're just going to get there. They've got their money. They're going to spend it, and they're going to win and win big. Would y'all agree with that? Or, you know, Geoff, have they got it made?
I think we'll see a couple of interesting races. The most likely the state auditor's race and treasurer primaries are going to be interesting at the least, I would say. But in general, to handicap it, you're right. Most of the incumbents of the 8 on the statewide level appear to be in fairly good shape. Hayes, would you agree with that?
I agree.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, the power of incumbency is important. It's you know, just over the last 3 or 4 days, one of the races that could become competitive is the state treasurer's race. For 3 years, there's a state law that requires the state treasurer to publish notice of unclaimed property in all the newspapers in the state of Mississippi. The current occupant of that office has not done that for 3 years. And you start a campaign, and now all of a sudden she has decided it's a good idea to put this in the newspaper. There's a whole lot of promotion going on. Several of the newspapers correctly in Mississippi have editorialized about this and brought this to everyone's attention. I was involved in the 2011 treasurer's race, and I learned 2 things in the 2011 cycle. One is that newspapers still mattered because we used them very effectively. Social media is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And not but about 25 lawyers in the city of Jackson care who the treasurer is in Mississippi. The current treasurer has got an opponent named David McRae, whose family is a very wealthy family, used to have a very large department store chain here in Mississippi, who is going to be able to invest in his campaign. And so that one will be interesting. Mary Hawkins is a very widely known and considered to be very effective mayor in the city of Madison. She's running, as Geoff said, in the race against Stacey Pickering as auditor. That'll be an exciting race to watch. And so those two, though, probably will be the only ones. Nobody else. There are going to be some Senate races where there are going to be some incumbents who get beat that are going to go down they're going to be a big surprise. That not many people are that hadn't hit the radar screen yet, but those are going to be fun to watch, and so we'll see. But those two are the ones I predict.
Okay. You know, I can't help but think, I can't help but wonder. That is, just listening to Hayes and Grant. You know, both Republicans, but both having different views on where conservatism really should go. I'm wondering about the Tea Party's role in this year's elections. Is it going to take, you know, a more active role than it has in statewide elections in the past? What are you guys doing?
First of all, I'd like to say hats off to Hayes Dent. I haven't met him personally, but I have a lot of mutual friends that know him and speak highly of you. And so I consider myself to be here with a couple of other professionals and appreciate what they do. That being said, as far as the Tea Party, it hasn't gone away. The numbers have grown in terms of people wanting a limited government, a government that gets back to the Bible, a government that gets back to the Constitution, what our founding father principles were about, and for the government to function in its proper role. So we feel like the base has grown. My only regret is that this particular race doesn't have a strong Tea Party candidate in it.
Why do you think that is?
Well, Chris Brown, who is a great representative, state representative in around the Amory, Aberdeen area, had gotten in the race and he got out for personal reasons. He owns a business and his father's retiring. He would have been that guy probably, and he's doing a great job in our state with some things. But it just so happens that the right kind of candidate that's going to unite the Tea Party and bring in the great equalizer, the supporters from outside the state, that guy's not in play right now. We have a lot of good people who are vanilla cupcakes when it comes to conservatism, in my opinion.
Geoff?
I'm a little surprised because of particularly last year how strong the Tea Party movement was, what a role it played. It's played a huge role this last year, in particular, last session in policy. I think it's only a matter of time before it plays maybe more of a role in the actual politics. Fielding candidates appears to be your main challenge. But like I said, it's played a noticeable role in policy as the legislature and governor deal with any kind of policy. They're looking over their shoulder for the Tea Party to make sure they're in line with some of their thoughts on a lot of stuff. We saw that with the Common Core debate. The fact that there was a Common Core debate was certainly driven by the Tea Party. Like I said, I'm a little surprised that it doesn't appear to be playing a bigger role as far as candidates in this cycle, but it's certainly got all the Republican politicians' attention in 2014.
Okay. Hayes, would you agree?
I think so. I mean, I would first of all say that my favorite kind of cupcake's vanilla. But I think that the Tea Party is strong when it doesn't try to be the Tea Party. People are inherently in Mississippi conservative. What happens to the is when a group of people try and take something and make something that maybe organically it wasn't intended to be. I mean, part of the whole, Tea Party movement was this uprising. I know Grant may not like this comparison, but it was sort of like the Occupy Wall Street. I mean, there was a certain beauty to Occupy Wall Street that you kind of admired, that people were willing to get up again and say, this is how this ought to work. And whether they're wrong or right doesn't really matter to me as much as the fact they're willing to do it. Most of the people that I see that, I don't know of anything that Tea Party is for necessarily that I'm against. I'm not sure. I will admit to everyone here, I haven't done a lot of studying on Common Core. I talk to school superintendents who tell me that it's a pretty good standard, that all of this stuff about crazy classes and teaching people how to do this and all that don't really exist under Common Core. I don't really know that, okay? But I sure do respect those superintendents who tell me that. And these are smart people who aren't from, this is not the superintendent of Jackson Public Schools. These are people who have done a great job and had a great career in education and whose school districts have been very successful. We've got a very successful school district, public school district in Yazoo County. Had the conversation with my school superintendent, if you will. And so some of these issues are sometimes get hijacked a little bit, in my opinion. I don't know enough about Common Core, so I'm a little out there on the limb, but the Tea Party does best when the Tea Party tries to just say, let's move this thing. I think there are a lot of Republicans right now in Mississippi who wish that the leadership in the state was moving to the right a little bit I want them to help the people in this state who need it the most. This business about just gun, we've got to have our gun rights. I'm 53 years old, I own 14 guns. I've never one time ever felt like my guns were in trouble. Okay? And so this obsession that we have with this issue, why don't we talk about trying to get Mississippi off the bottom? The economics that we agree on. The people in the Tea Party, I will agree with them on that. Those are the issues that I think makes the Tea Party strong.
Yeah, now let me just say that takes me to one question I want to ask before I open the floor up for questions, if anybody in the audience would like to ask some. And that is last year's race, Cochran, McDaniel. It got pretty bitter. It got pretty heated. You could say it got pretty nasty. There were lawsuits. There were some pretty harsh things that were said all the way around. What about hangover effect on politics in Mississippi this election cycle? Will there be any of that? Will lingering feelings from that race have any impact on state politics, Geoff?
I'm sure it will have some impact, but state level races have gotten nasty on their own a lot without any outside influence in recent years. One thing someone said to me here recently that stuck in my head ever since that race, and oddly enough, it was Ricky Cole with the Democratic Party talking about the two Republican parties here on either side of me. His take on it, and I don't know if it's going to prove to be right, but he said people will look back 20, 30 years from now, and people will be saying, oh, I am a McDaniel Republican, or I'm a Cochran Republican. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't know if the two of you are going to get together or get back together. One thing I've thought about the Tea Party, if the Tea Party would learn a little patience, they would be even more powerful than the movement is now. I think a lot of times, a lot of these folks that are most active, they want things changed, and they want them changed immediately. Our country, our democracy, republic is not set up that way. It's not the ship of state is not made to turn on a dime. It's supposed to be ungainly and slow,
built that
slow
way.
moving. It's built that way, and I think sometimes some people in the new movement and some people more active on the other sides of the spectrum are the same way. They want change and want it now, and you start getting a lot less compromise, a lot less meeting of the minds to figure out what's best. I rambled. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know what kind of, again, it's having a policy effect. It's making all of our Republican candidates this cycle move a little more to the right, make sure they badmouth Common Core and several other things, whether it's, there aren't enough Tea Party candidates to really tell what kind of effect it's going to have, I think, this cycle anyway.
Grant?
As far as affecting politics going forward, who knows? But I will say, when the Tea Party was helping unseat a Democrat congressman, boy, were we popular and most loved. It was when we said, you know what, limited government should affect Democrats and Republicans, and we started holding Republicans accountable. That's when, boy, the guns turned toward us. Now we had Democrats as enemies, establishment Republicans as enemies, and the media as enemies. And guess what? Still, with all of that turned toward us and McDaniel, he won the most votes in the runoff. Had not been for that other guy in DeSoto County, it would have been over. He'd been Senator McDaniel, U.S. Senator McDaniel. And in the following runoff, he added more votes still. After the race was over, I had pastors calling me for weeks saying they were so frustrated at the corruption that took place that they want to get involved going forward. They felt like they weren't engaged enough. So it all comes down to this. There's two facets of the Republican Party, one who is a true conservative and one who says the Tea Party values are ones that we need to make our talking points because that sells. So they talk the talk, but they don't deliver. And so that's the difference. Our deal is, it's not that we're impatient, and granted there can be personalities throughout and leaders in different places where I'll accept that as constructive criticism. But at the end of the day, we're trying to filter through who's talk and who's the real deal. Who's against Common Core when we're pleading and begging with them and showing them all the many things, and there are many things wrong with Common Core, to get on the right track. And we tell them we're going to make Common Core as unpopular as Obamacare, and they're not listening until Election Day. And then they say, you know what, this is not working with our political wins. Yeah, we got to scratch that Common Core. So that's kind of where the deal is. We're trying to find out who the real conservatives are. And with the final thought, it's this situation. In our U.S. race, Boehner doesn't go in and talk with Obama and come out with a compromise that works. The compromise always goes to giving up something in conservatism. So it keeps shifting to the left. So yeah, we're trying to pull it back to the right.
Okay. Hayes?
Yeah, I would, obviously I don't agree with that. I think that, in 1911, talked about 20, 30 years ago, we had a U.S. Senator from Greenville, Mississippi, Senator Percy, who cared about everybody in the state. He was considered an establishment person. Back then it was only one party. But he ran against a guy who had a nickname of the Great White Chief. And he said, the Great White Chief, James K. Vardaman, said in 1911 that it was the corruption caucus is who Percy was shilling for, basically. Now here was a man who was former Federal Reserve banker, friends with presidents, had done untold great deeds for people in his community. They ended up having a small issue at the 27 flood, but just a true public servant. And that race, Mr. Percy was beat very badly. Fast forward 103 years later, you had a group that was basically the same group. You had two groups, very similar, and this time there was a different outcome. I told Chris McDaniel in February of 2014 in the state capitol, he was talking with, he had one of his press guys there, and who's a good friend of mine. Pulled him aside and they said, Hayes, you're the most conservative lobbyist in the Capitol. You need to be for us in this race. I said, look, I don't remember when I became a Christian, but I became a Republican in 1978 because of a guy named Thad Cochran. And so you don't get me, but I said, I'll tell you this. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to tell you how you can win. I've been doing campaigns most of my life, and the candidate always represents the views of his supporters. And the candidate can always stop his supporters from lynch mobs, okay? And so I said, what you need to do right now is you need to say to your supporters who had already, by this point, this was February of 14, had already just unmercifully savaged Thad Cochran's good name, gotten into the family members. I mean, this was just, it was going on social media unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. I said, stop that immediately. And then tell everybody, I'm running for the United States Senate. 92% of the people in this country and in this state believe Washington, D.C. is broken. If you're in that 92%, I'd like for you to consider voting for me. If you're in the 8% that says Washington works, vote for Mr. Cochran. We now know June 3rd, Chris McDaniel would have won. I'm convinced of it. But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. They absolutely did character assassination at a level that I've never seen in my life. And so that's what happened. And then from a technical point of view, after the runoff, him and a lawyer from Jackson carried on a 4 or 5 month spectacle that is the only thing that outdid the conduct in the primary. And so I think that the Tea Party's got to find somebody who can represent their views to mainstream Mississippians and mainstream conservatives, because now, in the spring of 2015, everybody's figured this guy, Chris McDaniel, who beat up Thad Cochran about term limits, is now running for his 3rd term. They got beat up over term limits. They beat Thad Cochran over the head and saying, this guy's, I'm a supporter of term limits. Well, guess what? He's running for his 3rd term. So we've got a problem there, but I don't care about sides coming together or not. I want people to do what's best for the state.
I see you're
Whatever
training
side.
at the leash over here.
Okay.
Back up here.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something called projection. Projection is accuse your opponent of what you yourself were guilty of. Not Hayes Dent, but Thad Cochran's supporters. And namely the machine. What they did was character assassination on Chris McDaniel, and it was unrelenting. It was unrelenting. The people that I know that were supportive of McDaniel and McDaniel himself were pointing out the horrendous record of Thad Cochran continuously and ongoing. And you would get deleted like nowhere else in any congressman or Senate would I get deleted from Facebook by simply putting a record. Every time they would say Thad Cochran's a proven conservative leader, I would put his record on Facebook, and guess what? I'm no longer a friend, right? Same way with any of his supporters. It was like free speech kind of got lost there. But there was attacks. In fact, people talked so much about the spying on his widow. Let me tell you what happened there. The media was missing in action. There was a story that this senator is gallivanting around the world, spending multiple thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars traveling with a young lady. And a lot of people were wondering, who's this lady and where's his wife? And what about marriage vows in sickness and in health? Someone kind of did a poor job saying, you know what, the people need to know he's abandoned his wife, he's neglected her. Bad idea to go take a picture of her, right? But guess what? That's where the focus became. But let me tell you, and then people tried to connect. McDaniel's people did this or whatever. McDaniel didn't even know the particular guy that took that picture. But this happened, though. There was only one arrest in this race where a candidate's staff was arrested. And guess what? Does anybody know who it was? It was not Chris McDaniel's staff. It was Thad Cochran's staff. It was a guy who was a vice chair of the DeSoto County Republicans who was caught red-handed stealing McDaniel signs and fired by Jordan Russell for doing it. I called the press. Hey, it's pretty big news, isn't it? Oh, well, if the AP picks it up, we'll report it.
Let me just say,
Whoa, wait a minute now. I reported it,
Did you report it?
yes.
Okay, well,
Let me
there
just-
we go.
And let me just say, since I'm in the middle of these two guys, I don't think either side in that campaign has a whole lot of high ground to claim after that was over with.
I would agree. I agree with that.
Social media attack ads, it came from both sides. It was unrelenting.
Record's a record now.
It was an amazing campaign.
Exactly. The record's the
So,
record.
so we have run out of time. We burned up our time. I apologize. Is there one question out there? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So all three of y'all have mentioned how money plays a big factor into politics. And you also mentioned how it's a big issue trying to find a true conservative Republican. And I'm opening this up to all four of you guys up here, including you. What would, if you were to take away money from all of politics and you were to just focus on a conservative candidate in the Republican Party, who do you think would be the most likely candidate, or what do you identify more in the conservative department?
Are you asking who we think the best Republican candidate is?
Or what that would
I'm
look
asking
like.
you guys, based off of the Republican Party, you guys mentioned how you are looking for a more conservative individual. I'm asking, who do you think that person would be?
The question is, who is the most conservative Republican candidate in the race? I frankly don't know. They all look pretty darn conservative to me. Does anybody want to take a shot at that?
Yeah.
Real quick.
I would say this is a Mississippi Republican platform, one who lives by these principles and not only talks the principles. If they have a voting record, it's very easy to identify.
I think taking money out of it, if you looked at it, I mean, what I would want to see in a conservative candidate is somebody who believes in the individual and the power of the individual and the power of community. That's what we need. Conservatism has been hijacked a little bit. If you look at what William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan stood for, it was that's why they're referred to as happy warriors. Conservatism shouldn't be mean. Conservatism's already got a little bit of a hard edge to it. So to try and beat somebody over the head with conservatism, it never works and it never will work. And so we need somebody. Jeb Bush governed Florida very conservatively. I know people can't stand to hear that, but he did. Now he's got the most money too. So interestingly, but I think Scott Walker is somebody who has proven in Wisconsin that he's been able to communicate with the other side well. Now there are some on the far left that can't stand him. But I think all these guys, it's going to be interesting. But I want to see somebody who goes back, takes conservatism back 30 years, and doesn't just hijack these sort of obscure issues that people care to hear about.
Geoff, it looks like you're going to have the last word.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that one. The thought of taking money out of the politics is...
I know it's unethical, but
Right. These days, I don't know. It seems like on both sides, we've gotten into litmus test issues that really and truly don't matter to most rank and file in the masses. Labels, attack ads. What is conservative? In Mississippi in particular, what politicians in Mississippi are not conservative? It just depends on what scale you're looking at. You're talking about a state where Democrats in a race will argue whether one is an A versus an A plus with the NRA, stuff like that. So I don't know. It's interesting to watch what's going on with the Republican Party today, the two Republican parties.
It's definitely interesting to watch. So this concludes our program. I think we owe our guests a round of applause.